This is an audio recording of the book You'll Get Through This by Max Lucado, recorded by Moacir Sena. Chapter 7. More Bounce Back Than Bozo. Don't hold me to the precise details of this childhood memory. I can't recall the name of the kid who had the party, nor do I know my exact age, though judging from the neighborhood in which we were living, I must have been about 8 years old. I don't remember the games we played or the names of the other guests, but I do remember the bounce-back clown. He was pear-shaped, narrower at the top than the bottom, inflated and bozo-like. He was as tall as I was. All his facial features were painted on him. Ears didn't protrude. Nose didn't stick out. Even his arms lay flat. He didn't make music at the touch of a button or recite lines at the pull of a string. He didn't do anything except this: bounce back. Knock him down, pop. He popped right up, boom. Clobber him with a bat, pop. Pop him in the nose, cha. Or give him a swift kick to the side, take it. And he would fall down, but not for long. Boing. We did our best to level the clown, one punch after the other, each more vicious than the prior hit. None of us succeeded. Bozo had more comeback than the 69 Mets. He wasn't strong. He was full of air. He couldn't duck or defend himself. He didn't charm us with good looks or silence attackers with quick wit. He was a clown, for goodness sake. Red lips and yellow hair. Yet there was something about him, or within him, that kept him on his feet. We do well to learn his secret. Life comes at us with a fury of flying fists, right hook of rejection, sucker punch of loss, enemies hit below the belt. Oh! Calamities cause us to stagger. It's a slugfest out there. Some people, once knocked down, never get up. They stay on the mat, beaten, bitter, broken. Out for the count. Others, however, have more bounce back than Bozo. Joseph did. The guy was a walking piñata. The angry jealousy of his brothers that sold him into slavery, the below-the-belt deceit by Potiphar's wife that landed him in prison, and it was below the belt indeed. The butler's broken promise that kept him in prison. Joseph staggered, but recovered. Rocky music. By God's strength, he pulled himself to his feet and stood, stronger than ever, in Pharaoh's court. Pharaoh was the unrivaled ruler of the land. He was his own cabinet and Congress. He spoke the word, and it was done. He issued a command, and it was law. He entered the room, and he was worshipped. Yet, on this particular day, Pharaoh didn't feel worship-worthy. Let's imagine the prototypical Pharaoh. Bare-chested and rock-jawed, saggy in the back and the pecs, but solid for a middle-aged monarch. He wears a cloth on his shoulders and on his head a leather cone encircled by a rearing cobra. His beard is false, and his eye makeup is almond-shaped. He holds a staff in one hand and rests his chin in the other. Slaves fan the air about him. A bowl of figs and nuts sits within arm's reach on a table. But he isn't hungry. He just frowns. His attendants speak in anxious, subdued voices. When Pharaoh isn't happy, no one is happy. Dreams kept him up half the night. In dream number 1, cows graze on the river bank. 7 were fine and fat, prime candidates for a Chick-fil-A commercial. But while the healthy bovines weren't looking, 7 skinny cows sneaked up from behind and devoured them. Pharaoh sat up in bed and broke out in a sweat. After a few minutes, he dismissed the dream and fell back asleep. But dream number 2 was just as bothersome. A stalk of grain with 7 healthy heads was consumed by a stalk of grain with 7 withered heads. 2 dreams with the same pattern. The 7 bad devoured the 7 good. Pharaoh woke up distracted and befuddled. He assembled his council and demanded an interpretation. Cows consuming cows? Stalks gobbling stalks? Did the dream mean anything? His council had no response, had not a clue. His butler then remembered Joseph from their days together in prison. So the butler told Pharaoh about the Hebrew skill at dream interpretation. The king snapped his finger, and a flourish of activity ensued. Joseph was cleaned up and called in. In a moment of high drama, Jacob's favored son was escorted into Pharaoh's throne room. Oh, the contrast. Pharaoh the king, Joseph the ex-shepherd. Pharaoh, urban, Joseph, rural. Pharaoh from the palace, Joseph from the prison. Pharaoh wore gold chains, Joseph wore bruises from shekels. Pharaoh had his armies and pyramids, Joseph had a borrowed robe and a foreign accent. The prisoner, however, was unfazed. He heard the dreams and went straight to work. No need to consult advisors or tea leaves. This was simple stuff, like basic multiplication for a Harvard math professor. Expect 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. No one, including Pharaoh, knew how to respond. Famine was a foul word in the Egyptian dictionary. The nation didn't manufacture Chevys or export t-shirts. Their civilization was built on farms. Crops made Egypt the jewel of the Nile. Agriculture made Pharaoh the most powerful man in the world. A month-long drought would hurt the economy. A year-long famine would weaken the throne of the Pharaoh, who owned the fields around the Nile. A 7-year famine would turn the Nile into a creek and the crops to sticks. A famine to Pharaoh was the equivalent of electric cars to the sheikhs. Apocalypse. The silence in the throne room was so thick you could hear a cough drop. Joseph took advantage of the pause in conversation to offer a solution. Create a department of agriculture and commission a smart person to gather grain in the good years and to distribute it during the lean years. Officials gulped at Joseph's chutzpah. It was one thing to give bad news to Pharaoh, another to offer unsolicited advice. Yet the guy hadn't shown a hint of fear since he entered the palace. He paid no homage to the king. He didn't offer accolades to the magicians. He didn't kiss rings or polish apples. Lesser man would have cowered. Joseph didn't blink. Again, the contrast. The most powerful person in the room, Pharaoh, ruler of the Nile, deity of the heavens, grand poobah of the pyramid people, was in dire need of a scotch. The lowest person in the pecking order, Joseph, ex-slave, convict, accused sex offender, was cooler than the other side of the pillow. What made the difference? Ballast. Bozo had it. The clown at the birthday party, I came to learn, was braced by a lead weight. A 3-pound plate hidden at his base served as a counterbalance against the punches. Joseph, as it turns out, had a similar anchor. Not a piece of iron, but a deep-seated, stabilizing belief in God's sovereignty. We sense it in his first sentence. It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh. Genesis 41:16. The second time Joseph spoke, he explained, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Joseph proceeded to interpret the dreams and then tell Pharaoh that the dreams were established by God and God will shortly bring it to pass. 4 times in 3 verses, Joseph made reference to God. God, 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 God. Haven't we seen this before? When Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce him, Joseph refused, saying, How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? When fellow prisoners asked for an interpretation of their dreams, Joseph said, Do not interpretations belong to God? He locked the magnet of his compass on a divine pole star. He lived with the awareness that God was active, able, and up to something significant. And Joseph was correct. Pharaoh commanded a stunning turnaround. "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" He turned the kingdom over to Joseph. By the end of the day, the boy from Canaan was riding a royal chariot, second only to Pharaoh in authority. What an unexpected rebound! In the chaos called Joseph's life, I count one broken promise, at least 2 betrayals, several bursts of hatred, 2 abductions, more than 1 attempted seduction, 10 jealous brothers, and 1 case of poor parenting. Abuse, unjust imprisonment, 24 months of prison food. Mix it all together and let it sit for 13 years. And what do you get? The grandest bounce back in the Bible. Jacob's forgotten boy became the second most powerful man in the world's most powerful country. The path to the palace wasn't quick and it wasn't painless, but wouldn't you say that God took this mess and made it into something good? And wouldn't you think He can do the same with yours? Tally up the pain of your past. Betrayals plus anger plus tragedies. Poorly parented? Wrongly accused? Inappropriately touched? Oh, how onerous life can be. Yet consider this question. Is the God of Joseph still in control? Yes. Can He do for you what He did for Joseph? Yes. Might the evil intended to harm you actually help you become the person God intends you to be? Yes. Someday, perhaps in this life, certainly in the next, you will tally up the crud of your life and write the sum. All good. Lieutenant Sam Brown did. 2 years out of West Point, he was on his first tour of duty in Afghanistan when an improvised explosive device turned his Humvee into a Molotov cocktail. He doesn't remember how he got out of the truck. He does remember rolling in the sand, slapping dirt on his burning face, running in circles, and finally dropping to his knees. He lifted flaming arms to the air and cried, "Jesus, save me." In Sam's case, the words were more than a desperate scream. He is a devoted believer in Jesus Christ. Sam was calling on his Savior to take him home. He assumed he would die. But death did not come. His gunner did. With bullets flying around him, he helped Sam reach cover. Crouching behind a wall, Sam realized that bits of his clothing were fusing to his skin. He ordered the private to rip his gloves off the burning flesh. The soldier hesitated, then pulled. With the gloves came pieces of his hands. Brown winced at what was the first of thousands of moments of pain. When vehicles from another platoon reached them, they loaded the wounded soldier into a truck. Before Sam passed out, he caught a glimpse of his singed face in the mirror. He didn't recognize himself. That was September 2008. By the time I met him 3 years later, he had undergone dozens of painful surgeries. Dead skin had been excised and healthy skin harvested and grafted. The pain chart didn't have a number high enough to register the agony he felt. Yet, in the midst of the horror, beauty walked in. Dietitian Amy Larson. Since Sam's mouth had been reduced to the size of a coin, Amy monitored his nutrition intake. He remembers the first time he saw her. Dark hair, brown eyes, nervous, cute. More important, she didn't flinch at the sight of him. After several weeks, he gathered the courage to ask her out. They went to a rodeo. The following weekend, they went to a friend's wedding. During the 3-hour drive, Amy told Sam how she had noticed him months earlier when he was in ICU, covered with bandages, sedated with morphine, and attached to a breathing machine. When he regained consciousness, she stepped into his room to meet him. But there was a circle of family and doctors, so she turned and left. The two continued to see each other. Early in their relationship, Sam brought up the name Jesus Christ. Amy was not a believer. Sam's story stirred her heart for God. Sam talked to her about God's mercy and led her to Christ. Soon thereafter, they were married. And as I write these words, they are the parents of a 7-month-old boy. Sam directs a program to aid wounded soldiers. Far be it from me to minimize the horror of a man on fire in the Afghan desert And who can imagine the torture of repeated surgeries and rehab? The emotional stress has taken its toll on their marriage at times. Yet, Sam and Amy have come to believe this. God's math works differently than ours. War plus near death plus agonizing rehab equals wonderful family and hope for a bright future. Amen. In God's hand, intended evil is eventual good. With God's help, you can bounce back. Who knows? Your rebound may happen today. On the morning of his promotion, Joseph had no reason to think the day would be different from the 700 prior ones. I doubt that he prayed, God, please promote me to Prime Minister of Egypt before sunset. But God exceeded Joseph's fondest prayer. Joseph began the day in prison and ended it in a palace. And as he dozed off to sleep, he is reported to have smiled to himself and whispered, just as Max said, I have more bounce back than Bozo. This is Moacir Sena recording chapter 7, More Bounce Back Than Bozo, from the book You'll Get Through This by Max Lucado. Thank you so much for listening.